We are now going to be studying the molecules of life or biomolecules, macromolecules. They're called different things, but they are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, which are fats, and nucleic acids. So carbohydrates always contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And typically it's in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. In other words, there's twice as many hydrogen atoms as there are carbon and oxygen atoms. And the amount of carbon and oxygen is typically equal. Sugars and starches are carbohydrates that we get in our diet. They're a good source of quick energy. The major types of carbohydrates are monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are also referred to as simple sugars. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Our blood sugar, um, which people have to test, and manage when they have diabetes. Our blood sugar is glucose. It's our blood glucose. Monosaccharides are the building blocks for larger carbohydrates like disaccharides and polysaccharides. And they typically contain 3 to 7 carbon atoms. They easily dissolve in water. They're the most important fuel in the body. Glucose is the most important fuel in the body. And they are typically shaped like they have a hexagon shape. If you want to take the time to do it, you can count the carbons. There are 6 carbon atoms, and there are 12 hydrogen atoms, and there are 6 oxygen atoms in this glucose molecule. Disaccharides consist of 2 monosaccharides linked by covalent bonds. Sucrose or table sugar is an example of a disaccharide. Dehydration synthesis forms a disaccharide, and then a disaccharide can be broken down by hydrolysis. Here is a figure showing you 2 monosaccharides, glucose and fructose, that are combined by dehydration synthesis, the removal of water, and together they form sucrose. And you can have the reverse of that. Sucrose, which is a disaccharide, is broken down by the addition of water in a hydrolysis reaction to form the monosaccharides glucose and fructose. And then what you're seeing here is glycogen, which is many chains, many branching chains of glucose molecules. This is how our liver stores glucose, is by combining the glucose molecules to form the large molecule, the large polysaccharide glycogen. And plants do the same thing, except plants store glucose as starch. Polysaccharides that are common, this means they are made of many monosaccharides. Common polysaccharides are starches. We get those from potatoes and grains, our pasta and our breads and our potatoes. These are examples of starches in our diets. Cellulose is a polysaccharide found in the cell walls of plants that humans are unable to digest. But we do use cellulose as fiber to help us digest our other nutrients that we are able to digest. And glycogen is animal starch. It is the way that animals store glucose in the body, in the liver cells mostly. All right, a food contains organic molecules with the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. What class of compounds do these molecules represent, and what are their major functions in the body? So they represent monosaccharides, which is a carbohydrate, and they serve as quick energy or fuel for the body. When two monosaccharides undergo dehydration synthesis, which type of molecule is formed? And that is called a disaccharide. Some other disaccharides besides sucrose are maltose, which is the sugar found in malt beverages like malt liquor. And also if you add malt to your milkshake, that's maltose sugar. And I'm sorry, gosh, let's see, maltose is a disaccharide. And then another disaccharide is lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. Lipids are fats and oils, and they also are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a different ratio, though. The oxygen content is lower than in carbohydrates. Lipids include fats, oils, and waxes. Most lipids are insoluble in water. They form essential parts of the cell structure. For example, phospholipids. The cell membrane or plasma membrane is composed of phospholipids. And cholesterol is also found in our plasma membranes. And cholesterol is the base molecule that is converted into steroid hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Fatty acids and fats are also classified as lipids. Fatty acids are composed of a long chain called a hydrocarbon chain. And you can see this hydrocarbon chain here. This is the part that is the hydrocarbon chain. It's carbon molecules linked together, and these happen to be single bonds between the carbons, which makes this a saturated fatty acid. And then at one end of the hydrocarbon chain, there is a COOH group, which is called a carboxyl group or a carboxylic acid. And that will you will find that at the end of the hydrocarbon chain. If the fatty acid is saturated, then it only has single bonds between the carbon atoms, single covalent bonds. But if it has even one double bond, then it's called unsaturated, and it will cause that fatty acid to have a kink in the chain or a bend in the chain. Unsaturated fatty acids tend to be liquid at room temperature. We call them oils, and they are typically from plant sources. Saturated fatty acids tend to be solid at room temperature. We call them fats, and they also tend to be of animal origin. Fats like triglycerides, which is the fat that's found in our body, are formed by adding fatty acids to a molecule called glycerol. So this is the glycerol molecule, and these are three fatty acid chains. That's why it's called a triglyceride. And they are chemically bonded together by removing water. So we know that that is an example of a dehydration synthesis. Fats serve as stored energy, not quick energy, but stored energy, and also insulation and cushioning in the body. Steroids are lipids that usually are a form of cholesterol that has been converted into a steroid hormone. So cholesterol is the precursor molecule of testosterone and estrogen. It's obtained from the diet. It's also synthesized by the liver. And of course, you probably know there's a strong link between high cholesterol levels and heart disease. Cholesterol looks like this, or any steroid looks like this. It's a 4-ring structure. Phospholipids contain a phosphate head, which is the phosphate head is hydrophilic, meaning it will dissolve in water. It is soluble in water. So that non-lipid group is soluble in water. We call that the hydrophilic phosphate head. And then the two fatty acid tails are insoluble in water. The most abundant component in plasma membranes or cell membranes is the phospholipid. Describe lipids. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they have a lower oxygen content than carbohydrates. The type of lipid that would be found in a sample of fatty tissue would be a triglyceride, body fat or triglycerides. Which lipids would you find in human cell membranes? And those are the phospholipids. Proteins. This is the third class of macromolecule. They are the most abundant organic molecules in the human body. They account for 20% of the total body weight. They do contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like lipids and carbohydrates, but proteins also contain nitrogen, and sulfur may be present. Phosphorus may be present, but typically it's sulfur. Phosphorus is more likely found in DNA. Functions of proteins include support, movement, transport, like hemoglobin transports oxygen in the blood, buffering, metabolic regulation. This would include your enzymes and some of your hormones, coordination and control, and then defense, like the antibodies that are produced by your immune system. Structural proteins are the support proteins. They provide strength and organization. An example would be collagen fibers that are found in your bones and your cartilage. Movement is carried out by contractile proteins. These allow for muscle contraction. Transport proteins carry substances in the blood, like hemoglobin is a transport protein. Some proteins provide buffering. In other words, they prevent changes in pH. Some proteins are used as enzymes, so they are used for metabolic regulation to speed up chemical reactions in the body. Some proteins act as hormones, but be careful here because some hormones are lipids. Steroid hormones are lipids, and other hormones are protein hormones. And then we have antibodies and clotting proteins that are used in our body's immune system or defense. Proteins are composed of long chains of amino acids. There are 20 different amino acids in the body, and a single amino acid looks like this. It has a central carbon with a hydrogen attached to one end, a carboxyl group attached to another end. Remember, that's the same thing you saw with fatty acids. And then an amino group attached to that central carbon. And then an R group, that means it can be any chemical or group of chemicals attached. And that's what makes each amino acid different from each other, is the R group. That is the variable side chain that forms the 20 different amino acids. A peptide typically contains is a long chain of amino acids. It's a molecule of amino acids. They're connected by peptide bonds, which is a bond between the carboxyl group and the amino group of two different amino acids. And it's called a polypeptide if it's 3 or more amino acids, and 100 amino acids or more is called a protein. So a protein is just a larger polypeptide or a larger peptide. Protein structure, there are 4 levels: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. The primary structure of the protein is simply the sequence of amino acids. The secondary structure is either an alpha helix or a beta sheet. This is what the alpha helix looks like, and the beta pleated sheet looks like this. The tertiary structure is the final 3-dimensional shape of the protein, and then the quaternary structure is when you have many different tertiary structures chemically bonded together. This particular example is hemoglobin, which has 4 tertiary structures chemically bonded together.